And this isn't saying that they're perfect, right? Because and or that any of us are perfect, or that even myself, like some people might get the idea of, oh my gosh, you know so much about this stuff, you must always be resilient. And it's like, yeah, if only, right? Wouldn't that be great? So I find as much inspiration from other people demonstrating this as I do from my own
Mm.
study and practice of it.
Hi, I'm Roger Kastner, and welcome to the What Do You Know to Be True podcast. In these conversations, I talk with ordinary people about their extraordinary skill, a superhero power, as I like to call it, not to try to emulate it or hack our way to a new talent. Instead, I'm interested in what inspired them to develop this talent and how they think about their superhero power. The intention is to learn more about their experience with their superhero power, and in doing so, maybe we can learn something about the special talent in each of us that make us unique. This conversation is with Bill Hefferman and his talent in helping others with resilience and adaptability. Professionally, Bill guides teams and leaders through tough issues and challenging times. He's an expert facilitator and engaging instructor, and for over 30 years, he has led initiatives across a range of companies, cultures, and countries. He's known as a passionate expert on leading for resilience and adaptability. Bill offers principles, tools, and techniques for all to grow and flourish through the nonstop adversity and uncertainty that's so much a part of our world today. Bill has been sharing what he's learned about adaptability and resilience with coworkers, clients, conference attendees, people who are incarcerated, and many, many more for so many years. And today, we get to add ourselves to that list of people whom he's shared what he's learned about helping others with resilience and adaptability. From being a Peace Corps volunteer teaching math and science in Nepal to backpacking the Pacific Coast Trail to surviving and thriving in corporate America, Bill brings a wealth of firsthand experience to his resilience and adaptability practice. While he can do amazing things with a harmonica and frisbee, we're going to focus today's conversation on resilience and adaptability. We'll talk about how resilience and adaptability helps us not only cope and perform in moments of stress and adversity, but how those skills allow us to be more present in those moments so that we can learn the lessons that those opportunities of stress and adversity have to offer so that we can become stronger people and live more rich lives because we had those experiences. If you're ready, let's dive in. Good morning, Bill. How are you doing?
Fantastic, Roger. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am really excited to be having this conversation. In fact, when I started thinking about this podcast, I thought about this conversation as being a perfect example of talking to someone about their extraordinary talent. And, no offense, but sometimes I refer to it as ordinary people with an extraordinary talent. And you definitely have the extraordinary talent. I wouldn't call you ordinary though. So,
Exactly. Yeah, don't ever call me that.
superhero talent that I want to talk with you about today is how you've been helping leaders and teams face adversity, ambiguity through resilience. And you've been not only a student of resilience, but you've also been sharing for at least the last 10 years that I've known you in workshops, in um, conferences, with clients. I'm really excited to have this conversation to learn a little bit more about how you think about sharing resilience with others, not only having that talent developed for yourself, but the sharing of it.
Right.
Let's start off by going back to the beginning. Let's go back to the origins of what
Right.
inspired you
Right.
to learn more about resilience and sharing that with others.
Great. Well, so it was actually about 22, 23 years ago when I had just been hired into a household name high tech company here in Portland, Oregon. And I was hired in as an organization development professional to a business group that was getting shut down with the .com implosion, a very large
Mm.
business group, hundreds of people who were being redeployed and whose, heavy job impacts. And one of my colleagues, I was talking to them about our normal tools and tricks for managing change around communicating and training and all the usual stuff that particularly at that time we were thinking of with regard to managing change wasn't really cutting it for these people whose
Mm.
lives were being severely impacted. She said, "Well, do you know about resilience?" And I go, "Yeah, obviously we know about resilience." But she goes, "No, it's a discipline, and there's a thing, and there's a guy here in Portland named Al Siebert, who wrote a book called The Resiliency Advantage." And she knew him, and she put me in contact with him, and so I started talking to him, and just got really enamored with the topic. And and the reason why it just struck me as being so important is several reasons. One is it occurred to me that resilience, it is a social phenomenon, but it's a largely, at the same time, a self-driven phenomenon, and something that I can choose to do for myself, and habits that I can develop for myself. And um, also, I thought it sort of spoke to me about my own life philosophy at the time, and the the benefit of really working on yourself and adapting to your own situation. It's not like I had a horrible childhood or anything, but definitely some dysfunctionality growing up, through which I and most of my other siblings somehow found a way to flourish. And I just really loved stories of people who were able to flourish, not just in spite of conditions, but ultimately because of conditions. That we became greater through our struggles and our challenges that we face.
One time you shared with one of the groups that we were consulting with, you shared the idea that a well-lived life is not a stress-free life.
Right. Yeah, and that I got that from Kelly McGonigal and
Mm.
her TED Talk, "How to Make Stress Your Friend," as well as the book that she wrote after the TED Talk called "The Upside of Stress," in which she actually um, calls on the research of some of her own research, but largely of her colleagues' research at Stanford University, Dr. Ali Crum, who is a principal investigator for the Stanford Mind Body Institute or Mind Body Lab. And Aaliyah's done a lot of research into what resilience mindset and what she calls the stress as enhancing mindset. That when we lean into the challenges that we face, um, and look at what's going on in any particular big problem or challenge that we're facing, um, there's meaning there, and that when we turn our attention to what really matters here in terms of my own values, in terms of trying to have a positive impact, we ultimately find meaning in that. And there's both psychological and physiological or neurophysiological reasons for that when we turn toward meaning, we turn towards oxytocin, and which ultimately is it's what makes turning toward meaning in crisis. It flips the switch on that crisis being from a very stressful, debilitating, cardiovascularly challenging event into one that is in fact, with oxytocin, it flips the switch on our chemistry and turns it into a vasodilator. And this is why people who embrace stress and change and difficulty, um, and turn toward that meaning, ultimately do better, way better in terms of longevity and overall health and life outcomes.
Before we get too far, how would you define resilience?
Several ways. So there's different aspects of it. So the first aspect is the one that we're familiar with. If I asked you to think of somebody that is habitually resilient in the face of difficulty, you could think of those people in your life. And if I asked you to think of those qualities and characteristics of that person, that sort of resilience role model, if you will, um, you know what that looks like. It's like, I don't know what resilience is, but I'll know it when I see it. And so, but it's that ability to roll with the punches, water off a duck's back. You cope with things in a positive, resourceful, productive way, with adversity, change, uncertainty. Um, it also has that physical part of the description of resilience, something that is resilient, springs back to how it was when it's stretched, pressed, bent, etc. Um, and and so there's that bounce back, which is really an important part of that definition, because when it's not about being perfect and about always being bulletproof and never being vulnerable. It's about being vulnerable, being human, getting knocked down, but then dusting yourself off and getting up and getting back into the flow of things. And then finally, the um, the last aspect that I think is really important about resilience is this. I'm not so super fond of the term, but this sort of anti-fragile, this sort of anti-fragility. But what that speaks to is that, and more importantly, is that resilience isn't just about bouncing back to where you were, but you bounce forward. It's almost like a helical, elevation in your life of your personal and emotional development, that as you face challenges and as you bounce back through these things, you come back smarter, wiser, more connected. If I asked you to think of, if I ask you to think of something that you don't find difficult today that 10 or 20 years ago you found difficult, it's because of that bouncing forward of when you face challenges.
And I remember you one time describing resilience as being that rubber band, and yet the problem with that analogy is usually a rubber band that comes back after being stretched, it comes back to its original state. And the problem
Right.
with that metaphor is that through resilience, the rubber band actually should be stronger.
Right.
And therefore it's more like a muscle. The more you use a
Right.
muscle, the more it does break down,
Yeah.
but in the healing, it becomes stronger.
Yeah. Actually, that's a really great analogy. I think it is definitely more like a muscle. And in fact, that's what a lot of people use that analogy, but it's not just an analogy, it's reality that, in terms of our bodies, that and particularly in terms of our muscular development, that it only gets stronger by getting torn down a bit.
Well, Bill, I think most of the things I've learned about resilience, I've learned it from you. So I'm sure that was an analogy you used with me before, or I was had the privilege of
Could
being able
be.
to hear you talk about it. Yeah. So what motivates you to, I mean, obviously there's a there's a personal benefit to learning about resilience, but then you go the next step to share that information with a lot of people, with your colleagues, with your clients. As I said before, in workshops and conferences,
Right.
I've seen you in many different forums spread the gospel of
That's
resilience.
right.
What,
That's what it is.
yeah, what motivates you to do that?
It's a great question. Several things. So from a personal perspective, um, I have found through my life, and even before that moment back in 2001 during the dot-com implosion, when I heard about resilience from my colleague and then from Al Siebert, even before then, that this the benefit of, and I had this lived experience of bouncing back from challenges, and it just became a life philosophy or a life strategy for excelling and for being happy ultimately,
Mm.
um, and fulfilled. The other thing is that um, I see the and hear from people the impact that this information has, and that um, particularly in the last several years. Now, before the pandemic, it was a pretty popular topic, and once I talked about it a bit with folks, are like, "Oh yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense," and I could, and yes, I am resilient too at times, and here's what I do, etc. But for the last several years, it's really with the increases in burnout and the great resignation and quiet quitting and all that stuff, and not to mention just the rise in mental health issues around the world with increases in loneliness and anxiety and depression and all that, that being able to provide people some skills and some principles for maintaining a more even keel and for flourishing uh, through all that difficulty and challenge. It just it lights me up because I see them light up, and I just get such a buzz from really feeling like I'm making a positive contribution to people's lives.
Is there a virtuous cycle where
Right.
that then helps you be more resilient yourself? Seeing other
Mm.
people become
Right.
more resilient, does that help you become more resilient?
I think that's true of all of us. I am so inspired by other people in my life that um, that demonstrate that resilience in the face of incredible difficulty and hardship. Um, when I talk to people who are in the middle of dealing with cancer or some major life struggle, and they show up, um, in a resilient, adaptable way. And this isn't saying that they're perfect, right? Because and or that any of us are perfect, or that even myself, like some people might get the idea of, well, oh my gosh, you know so much about this stuff, you must always be resilient. And it's like, yeah, if only, right? Wouldn't that be great? So I find as much inspiration from other people demonstrating this as I do from my own
Mm.
study and practice of it. One of the things I realized recently that I really want to share again, and something I've produced before, but I haven't shared it in a while, is a sort of a resilience is not side by side diagram of, and resilience is not an individual sport. Resilience is not you know golf or singles tennis or whatever, but that it's um, pick your analogy. It's football. Football is life. Thank you, Danny Rojas.
Yes.
Yeah, there's definitely a strong social component, which is why it's we all uh, we need to be there for each other. Leaders need to be there for their followers. Followers need to be there for each other. Team members need to be there for each other. Family members need to be there for each other. And that when we are connected with one another socially and showing up in a way that is more supportive, more resilient, more resourceful for others, it really creates that what you're talking about, that virtuous cycle. And when others show up for us in that way, when we're down in the dumps, it's might be hard to believe, but sometimes I get anxious and challenged and struggle myself, and I get the same encouragement from others that they get from me.
Not too long ago, I heard about the concept of a resilient shepherd.
Mm.
And it's that
Oh yeah,
the person on the team
right.
that helps other people be more resilient. And I think that's a little bit of what you're talking about here, where you see other people being resilient, and it's motivating for you. Have you seen or have you studied? What do you know about teams and having that concept of a resilient shepherd? And is that um, I'm curious if that's usually one person or if that's a shared role that gets passed around in contacts. What do you know about that?
Like with most things organizationally, it's really the leader and the leaders that have the strongest leverage in setting that tone. And there's some research that was shared in Gabriella Kellerman's and Martin Seligman's latest book called Tomorrow Mind, in which there's this really interesting section on resilience there, and in which they say that um, people who report to a resilient leader are 3 times as likely to be resilient themselves, and 50%
Mm,
more productive, and 30% more creative, etc. And that so those, when you think about the ultimate resilience shepherd, is really that leader who's able to show up um, strong, humble, service oriented, compassionately oriented, also, and does all those things that I talk about, and that the research suggests um, resilient leaders, or people who lead for resilience, demonstrate these qualities and behaviors. But again, it doesn't have to be a formal leader, a person who is a leader positionally, but can also be anyone on the team.
yeah, we've been on teams where the leader is the role model, and then we've been on teams where that might not be true. And some of
Less
those
of the role model.
capabilities or skills that, yeah, it's almost like in spite of the leader, we will thrive
Yeah,
because
but
of
that but it's particularly tough, I think,
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
that with that leader that is showing up, um, you know, as in their less resilient, resourceful self. I mean, we all go there. We all panic, and no one has to be perfect. But it's really about what's that habit that they what
Hmm.
where do they habitually go, and if they habitually go to the yelling and the screaming and the micromanaging and the all that stuff that non-resilient leaders do, it can really damage a team. And I think it's super hard for a team with that situation to really flourish fully in the way that they have potential to.
Not too long ago, you were sharing with me this concept of the evolutionary advantage of joy.
Mm.
And obviously there's an evolutionary advantage to fear. When
Hmm.
when we were drinking at the water hole and something is wrestling around in the bush, our amygdala would fire off and we're running back to the middle of the herd. um, but this idea of the evolutionary advantage of joy seems to be the flip side of that. Could you say a little bit more about that and how being more resilient
Right.
helps you access joy?
That's great. And it's funny, it also works the other way. I think joy also helps us access resilience. I was listening to a podcast yesterday with Michael Jure, actually. You got me thinking about him again. And I forget who the guest was, but in positive psychology, the guy who talks, Fred Bryant, who talks about savoring. And I was thinking about joy, and as it relates to the psychological tool, the positive psychological tool of savoring. And Fred said something really interesting, is that getting less unhappy doesn't necessarily make you more happy. That that those are separate phenomena. So when if you think of the analogy, as you know, that I like to use in thinking about resilience, as a horizontal line, and that if you're below the line, you're in that non-resilient, non-resourceful, not coping well with things, fight, flight, freeze kind of state. And that when you're above the line, you're in this resilient, resourceful, joyful, etc. And those skills and tools that can help you go from those super negative, unhappy, not coping well states up to, to get up towards that line, that midpoint, um, aren't the same skills that will elevate you into those upper
Mm.
reaches of being above the line. And that's where joy and gratitude and savoring and mindset and positivity and creativity and collaboration, all these things, where that comes to fore. And and you can think of it in terms of psycho emotional buoyancy, that that when you um, experience these more elevated states of joy and happiness and connection, it acts as a bit of a buffer to getting pulled down below the line. Um, and the other thing about joy that I really like is, and it comes from, uh, there's a way of thinking about joy in terms of it being not like this explosion of ecstasy, like, oh my God, I went to this concert last night and it was just so inspiring. And I mean, there's that kind of joy. But those aren't always accessible. And every day, every moment we have available to us, these little micro moments of joy that in polyvagal theory they call glimmers. And a glimmer is like a little microburst of connection, of meaning, of joy, of beauty that you purposefully look for in your life. Now, we normally experience these glimmers in terms of, the sunlight coming through the window in a particular way, or a funny interaction among babies or kids or cats or cat videos, or whatever these little moments are. And the more you habituate yourself towards looking for those glimmers, the more you see them as you develop the habit of looking for those little joyful moments and those little glimmers, that you then habituate yourself to that.
That makes me think that one of the reasons why you share so much about resilience is you see the impact and that gives you joy.
Mm.
Does that sound true?
Your premise at the beginning of this was that, what's your fastball, what's your
Mm-hmm.
superpower. And for me, I'm really a short, what I like to, in my 30 years as an organization development professional, at one point it hit on me that I'm a short haul carrier, that I'm not that guy you're going to stick on a project for months on end. But if you give me that short term mission of showing up for a conference, showing up for a group of people, showing up for an experience that I've designed and that I'm then able to deliver, that whole process of being given that mission, thinking about that group of people, designing a solution for them, and then delivering that. There's such an incredible energy and connection that happen when I give people, have people break out into triads or pairs, and share stories about their own personal resilience role models or something like that. And then they go and sit with people and listen in on these conversations. They just really light me up because I'm like, yes, this is where this is real. This is helpful. I'm having an impact on these people's lives. And if you think about in terms of like what kind of junkie I am, it's like it is. That's really my drug of choice, is being able to
Mm-hmm.
orchestrate these kinds of human interactions and seeing them unfold.
So, Bill, what do you know to be true about resilience?
So I've been at this for 22 plus years studying this topic. And the thing that I was really only made mindful of in the last 7 years or so, it's not a technique, it's not a gimmick. It can be, and some of those gimmicks and tricks can help. Ultimately, is really your core beliefs and assumptions, your mindset about the nature of difficulty and the nature of life and the nature of challenge. And the more that you can lean into that challenge mindset, the more that you can lean into that stress as enhancing mindset, um, the stronger your resilience will be. This is another strong point around what I know to be true. is that if we can leverage the power of the pause, the sacred pause, and just when we're all spinning and ruminating in our heads and filled with anxiety and worry, getting pulled down the drain into the, way below the line, trying to fight your way out of those depths of despair and rumination from that state of being is it's not very effective. Einstein said something to the effect of our problems cannot be solved at the level with the same mindset at the level of which they were created, or something like that. You need to think differently. You need to be and do differently to change your
Mm-hmm.
state. And oftentimes what that takes is, um, this is another thing that I know to be true, is that one of the fundamental core practices of resilience that serves us really well is simple mindfulness, of being able to drop into a present state and take a step back and look at the big picture and look at things objectively and go, okay, I'm feeling pretty stressed and this bad thing just happened and I'm feeling kind of anxious about that, and that's okay. And I'm going to practice this sort of radical acceptance of just what is and not judge it and just be where I am right now. And from that state of presence and of here and now, kind of accepting, non-judging presence, we don't have to fight so hard to get back. Oftentimes we'll sort of, through Brownian motion, find ourselves, getting back into a more neutral state. And then from there, we'll have greater access to more of our, tools and tricks of joy and gratitude and reframing about how we look and see things. And then one last thing that I should say that I really know to be true in resilience is that that just, and it kind of comes back to mindset, but reframing how we're thinking about things, being able to, and that takes that pause, that mindfulness, and then from there being able to say, okay, so what's the positive challenge here, or what's the opportunity here?
So what I love about what you just shared is I was thinking about the old saying stop, drop, and roll.
Yeah.
Now that's when you're on fire, which may or may not be
Yeah.
applicable in this situation. But having, you said having that mindset, and I might have stepped on the punchline earlier where you had previously shared this idea that a well-lived life is not a stress-free
Mm,
life. So, the absence of stress, the absence of change and adversity, like one probably not going to happen in any situation, but maybe that, as you said, the radical acceptance, that mindset that there will be moments like this, then when it is happening, that ability to be present, to get in the moment, because a lot of the things I think that are fueling the reactions are things that will happen outside of the moment
mhm.
that will need to be dealt with, that could be really big, impactful things, but in the moment those things are not happening. And so
Right.
all you can do is control that moment. So being
Right.
radically present.
And
And then the shift,
controlling the controllable. You can
yeah.
controlling the controllable and focusing on what can I actually do in this moment.
And then the third thing of again, sort of shifting it to like, what's the positive? What's the
Mhm.
opportunity to flourish? What's the opportunity to overcome? What's the, um, how can I look at this in a positive and grow from this experience and not just look at it as a negative or a threat?
Right. Right. And what's that bigger than self? What's my bigger than self goal here? Is another one that another reframe that I really love. Of, and then also you were talking about, how can I grow from this? So having that growth mindset that says, okay, I'm not a master of this situation yet. What do I need to learn here, in dealing with it?
Mm-hmm. What's something that you thought to be true about resilience early on that you have come to learn is not true?
Yeah, great question. So they're all great questions, Roger. But this, I like this one. Um, the several things. Um, I used to be, and still am to a certain extent, averse to what what we would ordinarily think of as negative emotions, or but they're not negative emotions. It's just energy. It's energy in motion. And this is a problem that some people have with positive psychology, and it's a misinterpretation in my mind of what positive psychology is. That it's not happyology. It's not how to just be happy all the time. I mean, because there are definite advantages to positivity and to having that sort of glass half full perspective. Um, but at the same time, it can also be, particularly when we're helping others, um, it can turn into toxic positivity, um, where our expectation is, well, we're feeling uncomfortable with other people's discomfort, and so then we demand of them to be happy. So 23 years ago, here I am, like in my early 40s, when I was really starting to study this, and I was more oriented towards that sort of happyology, and more like
Hmm.
we should just be more positive, um, which is true to a certain extent. But then I've developed this more nuanced understanding that we got to be real, and that while these challenging emotions, anxiety, worry, frustration, come into us, or come into our lives, we um, we don't have to shut the door in their face, and pretend they're not there. But we don't need to overly indulge them either. So, or make them bigger or more real than they are. And that's where I think mindfulness and acceptance come in, of where you can, and again, this is simple, not easy, uh, uh, is being able to accept and be with where you are. There's some of those more challenging emotions that some people might think of as being, quote, negative emotions, like grief and sadness. But those are, having experienced parental loss in the last few years of my in laws and my own mother, um, and getting into this, some depth of grief around those, but then feeling from that, or learning from that, that those aren't bad things to feel, and they're just very natural things to feel, and they serve a purpose. And there's a sweetness, and a connection, and a there's a term of a psychologically rich life, which is a really interesting concept. There are people who are prone to having more psychologically rich lives, which tends to correlate with higher levels of meaning and purpose, but not necessarily with that sort of hedonic, like, isn't life fantastic, sort of, isn't life always joyful?
I'm sorry. I have like a childlike sense of joy this morning, and everything you're talking about, I'm sort of like connecting to, the Bobby McFerrin comment, or this idea. Now I have the song in my head from the Lego Kids movie. Everything is awesome,
Oh yeah.
and the idea is like, if everything's awesome, is anything awesome?
Yeah.
So like, to know grief, you also need to know joy.
Right.
To know sadness, you also need to know love. Not that these things are necessarily opposites, but to have that full range
Right.
of what we consider positive and negative emotions,
Right.
makes life more rich, more
Yeah.
valuable, more of an experience than if it's just monochromatic.
Right. Very much so. I think, and that's what Fred Bryant was actually saying in this podcast with Michael Gervais, um, is that when we shut ourselves off from feeling and experiencing those challenging emotions, we attenuate, or dampen, the highs as well. That our ability to really feel
Hmm.
joy and love and connection. And I think that's also related to what I was talking about in terms of a psychologically rich life.
Okay, Bill, you ready for a lightning round?
Ha! Yeah, let's give it a try.
Which do you prefer, strenuous yoga or a deep meditation session?
Deep meditation. I'm a meditation guy. Yeah.
What's your go to, pizza or tacos?
Oh, tacos. I could even, yeah, porque no in Portland. Oh, so good.
When you're going on a retreat, do you head for the water or do you head for the mountains?
Mountains.
When learning something new, do you prefer to listen, read, or watch?
Listen,
A favorite book or movie you've recently watched and would recommend?
you know, Ted Lasso, of course. So I love things that make me that both. Well, this is why Ted Lasso is so great. It's that they're poignant, but they're also super humorous and just touch us in a really and positive. I'd say, just in a really empowering and lifting, enlightening way.
Fill in the blank. Resilience is.
A team sport.
Hmm. Say more about that.
This is the thing that I think people might resist or push back against in resilience is their misunderstanding of resilience. It's like when somebody's saying be resilient, we're almost telling that person that they're solely responsible for their flourishing and well-being, when in fact we do depend upon one another and our social connections. And that goes back to the Harvard uh, study of following these men and these people over 75 years, starting in the 20s, these Harvard undergrads, and they follow them and then also people in the community next to Harvard. Um, and and the thing that was hands down most predictive of a happy, flourishing, positive existence was having deep, meaningful social connections.
So, Bill, before we go, where if people wanted to learn more about resilience and to learn more about Bill Hefferman, where would you point them to?
That's great. So the couple places, a few places. BillHefferman.com. You'll find me there and find most of the links and how to contact me. And you can even set up some time with me. I have a schedule link there. There's LinkedIn, of course. Just search for Bill Hefferman. There's only one of me out there. MAN, Bill Hefferman. And then I'm starting to publish on Substack.
Mm.
And so they can find me at billhefferman.substack.com. And there I'll be publishing uh, articles on a blog, 400 to 600 word things is what I'm aiming for, I think. Um, at least 2 times a month, possibly more.
If they're in Portland and they want to see you play the harmonica, what's the
Oh
band name and where do
yeah,
you guys play?
it's called the Pagan Jug Band. It's sort of a bluegrass inspired Americana uh, folk band, uh, and we play every third Tuesday from 6 to 9 at a really great, well-known Portland music venue called Laurel Thirst. It's in an area called Laurelhurst, but it's called the Laurel Thirst Pub, and every third Tuesday, yeah, come find us. Pagan Jug Band. You can also find us on Facebook. And
Bill, thank you very much. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for the dedication you've put into learning about resilience, and not only showing up for the teams that I've been able to be a part of, where you have been that resilient shepherd, where you've been that role model, and then really dedicating a large part of your professional career to sharing what you've learned about resilience, and that every time you and I talk, you have learned something new about resilience. And so you're
yeah,
constantly evolving that knowledge and that which you share. And it is a gift that you give all of us. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for sharing your insights today.
yeah. Thanks, Roger. And you asked earlier about like, are there other people in my life that provide that same inspiration? And you are definitely one of those. I consider you
Mm.
a fellow traveler along the the path of greater living through resilience and adaptability. So,
Wow. Well, thank you. That's an honor. Okay, my friend, until next time, be well.
all right. Thanks a lot, Roger.
Okay,
Take care.
bye-bye. A big thank you to Bill Hefferman for sharing his insights and knowledge about resilience and adaptability, and for bringing his own theme music. That's right. The music today was provided by Bill. Stay tuned for the outtakes to hear the complete song if you want. I'm grateful whenever I get to hear him share his experiences in both learning and teaching others about resilience and adaptability. I love how he breaks down that while resilience does help with dealing with stress and adversity, it is resilience and adaptability that helps us bounce forward and become stronger because we went through that challenge. To borrow an idea from the TV show Ted Lasso, resilience and adaptability are what helps you grow even stronger when you go through the messy middle parts of any journey or experience. Bill also shared an important perspective from Kelly McGonigal that I think is worth remembering. A well-lived life is not a stress-free life. This conversation is an opportunity for us to consider, how does stress and adversity impact our own superhero powers? And going deeper, does our response to stress and adversity enable our talents to shine brighter and have a more meaningful impact on others? Or does our response have a negative or dimming effect on our superhero powers? And if so, where do we want to work on our resilience and adaptability to increase the potency of our talent so we can have a bigger impact on others? As Bill would suggest, working on resilience and adaptability can help us wherever we are on this response continuum to stress and adversity. So there's no better time to start. If you're not sure what your superpower is, one way to learn is to ask a trusted friend or colleague. As a heads up, they are likely to ask you what you think their superhero power is, so be ready with a response in advance. So much good stuff in this conversation. I'm grateful to Bill for continuing to share what he knows to be true about resilience and adaptability so that we can all be better and learn as we go through those messy middle parts of our lives and show up even stronger for our family, friends, teammates in ways that help them be even more resilient too. And thank you all for listening in. If you like this episode, please do us a favor and give us a review or click that like button, whichever platform you're on. Thank you for doing that. It's a great way to help others discover the podcast. What Do You Know to Be True is a 3 Blue Pens production. I'm your host, Roger Kastner. We are recording on the ancestral lands of the Duwamish and Suquamish people. To discover the ancestral lands of the indigenous people whose lands you might be on, please go to native-lands.ca. Be well, my friends. And Bill, play us out.
And now I've forgotten the question. This is the outtake. Okay. Well, take two. Anyway, so that's what I think I've learned really, and how my things have evolved over the last 20 years, is to becoming just more embracing of and more accepting of the dark side.
In our community, you're known for being a disciple of resilience as well as for playing the harmonica. And this is possibly one of the longest times you and I have had a conversation where you haven't, whipped out the harmonica and started playing. I know it's within reach. You can go ahead and play us a tune right now.
I don't know. Let's see. But it's funny. We'll see how it picks up on the mic. And what is this thing? What is this? This is a C, a G. What is this? Can you hear that?
Bravo.